Galvarino was a legendary warrior of the Mapuche tribe, whose bravery and determination are remembered 500 years after his death. A fascinating character from history, he is often referred to as the real-life Wolverine from X-Men. Why, you may wonder? Let's find out together right now. The year is 1557, and the long conflict known as the Arauco War is well underway. Spanish invaders driving their ambition of conquest into the land we now know as Chile, being resisted at every turn by the brave Mapuche tribe who call it their home. At the Battle of Lagunillas in south-central Chile, an army of Spanish conquistadors routed several thousand Mapuche Indians, capturing around 150 prisoners. Amongst the imprisoned men was a young chieftain named Galvarino. Along with his men, Galvarino was marched back to the main Spanish encampment where a swift trial took place. But rather than simply execute their prisoners and be done with it, the leader of the Spaniards, Governor Mendoza, ordered instead his men to sever the right hand and nose of each captured warrior and to cut off both hands of the leaders such as Galvarino. Mendoza hoped to end the war early by striking fear into his enemy and forcing the Mapuche to surrender. Little did he know, however, that his foe was not so easily intimidated, and in reality, the war would last for over a century. According to Mapuche legend, Galvarino bravely offered up his hands to be cleaved off, demanding in vain that his captors deliver the killing blow. Whether this is accurate is unclear, but it would certainly not be a surprise given the rest of his story. The mutilated soldiers were released and sent back to their tribe to deliver the intended request for surrender. Reaching their destination, Galvarino was taken to the Mapuche general Caupolicán, to whom he was supposed to plead capitulation, but he would do no such thing, instead urging the general to rally their people and fight back against the Spanish invaders. Standing tall before the gathered tribe, he raised his handless arms in the air and spoke clearly and passionately, delivering the words, "My brethren, why have you stopped fighting these Christians? The damage they have done since they entered our realm and what they have done to me is what they will continue to do if we are not diligent in destroying these injurious people." Inspired by the immense bravery of this mutilated young chieftain, Galvarino was named a commander in the Mapuche forces and they began to prepare for war. But Galvarino was not content to merely be the man to rally his people for battle. He was determined to also be the one to lead them. Knowing that he would be useless in a fight given his current state, he took the unbelievable decision to have long, sharp blades fastened to each of his arms, sticking out past the stumps to create two deadly weapons. The real-life Wolverine indeed. This act would transform him into a legend, inspiring his people for centuries to come. What fear he must have struck into the enemy to see a madman charging at them, fire in his eyes and two swords for arms. They began fighting back immediately, and less than a month after his capture and mutilation, Galvarino found himself on the front lines at the Battle of Milarupe. It is said that he entered the battle at the head of the Mapuche army, commanding his men and inspiring them with his words, "My brothers, see that you all fight very well. You do not want to be as I am without hands, so that you will not be able to work nor to eat, if you do not give it to them." He raised his transformed arms high into the air to show his men and spoke the words, "Nobody is allowed to flee, but to die, because you died defending your mother country." With that, he charged headfirst into battle, moving quickly past his army and demonstrating once again his unrelenting bravery, declaring loudly that he would happily die first, and though he no longer had hands, he would do what he could with his teeth. Despite their inspirational commander and outnumbering the Spanish forces 2-1, the Mapuche implemented their battle plan poorly, and despite initial success in disrupting the Spanish cavalry, Mendoza was eventually able to bring his cannons to bear and turn the tide of the battle in his favour, quickly routing the Mapuche. When it was done, 3,000 Mapuche had been killed. Only a few hundred survived and were taken prisoner. It is said that Galvarino was able to cut down Mendoza's second-in-command during the battle, and despite his reckless aggression, he found himself amongst the small number of living and a prisoner once again. This time his luck had finally run out, and he was sentenced to death. Records conflict over the manner of his end, some suggesting hanging, whilst others imply that he was thrown to the dogs. Even in this moment, Galvarino did not flinch, and in response to being offered mercy and a chance to join the Spanish side, calmly replied, "I would rather die than live like you. I'm only sorry that my death will keep me from tearing you to pieces with my teeth." A tragic end to the story of Galvarino, but his determination and bravery remained an inspiration for many years to come as the war raged on, the Mapuche resisting Spanish occupation for over a century. Truly, one of the most colourful real-life warriors from history. His image remains a strong and powerful one that speaks as much of his insane dedication to fighting for his homeland as his unwavering bravery.
This is Deuteronomy 28 and 49. Yahweh Bashem Shai shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle, and the fruit of thy land, until thou be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kine, or flocks of thy sheep, until he hath destroyed thee. Kahala Yahweh Bashem Yashai, Bashem Kodash, which are the true Hebrew names of the Most High Father, Yahweh, which is Hebrew for He is, and His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, which is Hebrew for He is salvation, He delivers. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, with the house of David reborn again in this generation. And Shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the tribe of Naphtali. Okay, the tribe of Naphtali is one of the 12 tribes of Israel today. Okay, the tribe of Naphtali would be known as the Argentinians and the Chileans of modern society. Okay, and from the video we just watched, it was one of the historic records of this tribe to show how fierce they were. And also, it didn't go into this fact, but the Argentinians, the native, back in their native tribe era, were one of the only tribes that did not get conquered by the Europeans that came here. Now, like I mentioned, the tribe of Naphtali is the Argentinians and the Chileans. When you get into Naphtali actually comes from one of the 4 wives that our forefather Jacob had. Bilhah. Bilhah, she was the handmaiden to Rachel. Now, Bilhah, she was one of the servants of Rachel and Leah's father. And when Rachel was given to Jacob, and Jacob was leaving with his wives, Laban gave Bilhah so that way she could be Rachel's handmaiden. Well, eventually in the Bible, when you read it, Rachel, because she had taken the idols of her father, she had been cursed, and because of that, her bearing children was not an easy thing. Right? She hadn't raised as many children as her sister Leah did. Right? Leah came with 6 children, where Rachel only came with 2. Well, because of this, Rachel gave her handmaiden Bilhah to her husband Jacob, so that Bilhah could give Jacob sons that would be considered Rachel's. But in this case, Rachel had Naphtali and Dan. Dan would later on be amalgamated, or should I say absorbed, into the other tribes. But Naphtali would go on to become the Chileans and the Argentinians of today. But we'll get into that in just a bit. Now let's go and read the name, that how Naphtali got his name. This is Genesis 30 and 8. And Rachel said, "With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sisters and have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. Okay? Because when you get into the name Naphtali, if you look up the word here in the Blue Letter Bible, H53 and 21.
Strong's H5321. Naphtali. Naphtali.
It ultimately means wrestling. Alright, so that's why she said that. So that's where that name comes from. So also that name, remember, it would be a nomen omen. The names in the Bible for people are nomen omens to what's going to come from their future or their character. In this case, like we watched in the video in the beginning, the guy Galvarino, he was a very strong warrior who wrestled with the invaders. Okay, and when you consider that the tribes that came from Naphtali were the tribes that did not get conquered from the Europeans, goes to show you, that they had that spirit in them to not be conquered, right? And also they were given the means by which not to go into captivity like the other tribes did. Next, let's go ahead and talk about the blessings that I had mentioned, right? This is, again, how we understand who Naphtali is in these end times, because of this event that took place in the Bible. You can find in Genesis towards the end, right, where it talks about how our forefather Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, when he knew he was going to come to the end, he was going to move on to glory, he gathered his sons together and prophesied and basically gave each of his sons a blessing and also a small prophecy of what would befall them. And when I say them, I'm talking about the descendants that come from them. So in this case, Naphtali, this is what our forefather Jacob had to say. Right? He said, Naphtali is a hind let loose. He giveth goodly words. So again, remember, Israel, when he had seen his descendants, the Lord had given him visions to see what would befall his sons, right? So he's seen all the people of the Argentinians and the Chileans, right? And he had chosen this to say. Now, what does this mean, right? That he is a hind let loose. And what does it say here, right? That he gives goodly words. Well, let's go into hind. A hind being let loose. Well, when you look up the word hind, ultimately, it means it's a deer. Right here you can see it's a red hind there in the Andean mountains. So our forefather Israel had gotten this vision of Naphtali and his descendants, and he had seen that they would have a high dwelling. Now let's just read real quick what it says here, and this is from the book The Peruvian Wildlife by Barry Walker on page 58. It says, other ungulates of the Andes include two large high-altitude grassland deer, which are amongst the more frequently seen animals in Peru. The Andean hermal, or turuca, as it is known in Quechua, is the rarer of the two and now considered to be endangered. It is found at extremely high altitude, where its presence depends upon the availability of cover. Mostly isolated patches of Quiena woodlands, which are increasingly threatened by a growing local need for firewood. This barrel-chest and short-legged species occurs in the Huascarán National Park and is isolated areas of the Cordillera Volcanota. Its diagnostic Y-shaped antlers, each with two prongs, easily distinguish it from the white-tailed deer, which has only a single prong but with several branches, or a rack. This latter species is common and well known to North American visitors since its range extends all the way to Canada. It tolerates human presence to an unusual degree and is the deer most likely to be seen by hikers in the Andes, especially on the Inca Trail. Okay, so our forefather Israel, one, seeing these descendants of Naphtali, one, he understood that they were going to live high in the mountains, just like the native tribes. That's one of the ways that they managed to escape from their captivity from the Europeans. They fled into the mountains where the Europeans didn't want to go to conquer them. And besides that, they were very fierce warriors. And amongst those, high Andes, you had these animals, right? That's where the hind comes from. And when it says a hind let loose, because remember, that tribe wasn't captured. It was not captured and I guess you could say domesticated, to a certain extent, right? It was let loose. It was free, just like the people of the tribe of Naphtali. Now, when it says here, he giveth goodly words, well, there's this book that explains that the tribes in this area, that they were fairly sophisticated. They were very eloquent in their speech, which we're going to read this right here from a book called The Jesuits and the Incas by Sabine Highland on page 121. It says, considers the Incas rulers as models of natural virtue and wisdom like the Jewish kings of the Old Testament. In fact, he attributes long list of proverbs to the emperors, particularly to Pachacoti. These proverbs undoubtedly are intended to echo the Solomonic proverbs of the Old Testament and to implicitly compare the Inca kings to the ancient biblical rulers. The Inca Empire, in Valeria's view, was a well-ordered land of plenty, where justice and law were assured to all citizens. Here's the point. Centers of higher learning flourished in the capital under the guidance of the Amanta, wise men who taught poetry, music, philosophy, astrology, and how to speak with elegance and taste. Although other chronicles would command the rule of the Incas, none surpass Valeria in praising the manifold virtues of Tahuntinsui and its noble kings. Moreover, none were so eloquent in defending the cause of Atahualpa, the victor in the Inca Civil War and the last Inca king. So besides that, recent studies have also showed that people from Argentina tend to have a higher IQ than some of the other Native American peoples. That's another thing when it says he giveth goodly words, right? So again, it shows you that this tribe would be, like it noted here, right? Extremely eloquent, and that they would be getting into the higher cerebral topics and subjects. Okay, now next let's go and read this, because besides the nomen omen that was given by the mother of the particular son of the 12 tribes of Israel, the blessing from the father, you also had the blessing from Moses. When Moses was going to depart the 12 tribes after leading them out, here in the book of Deuteronomy, he for the most part goes to every tribe except for Simeon and gives them a blessing. Well, this is the blessing that Moses gives onto Naphtali. Now, this is, besides being a blessing, it's also kind of like a future prophecy of who they are. And this is what's used mainly to also identify who Naphtali is today. This is Deuteronomy 33 and 23. And of Naphtali he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full with the blessing of Yahweh B'Shem Shai, possess thou the west and the south. Right? When you get into that, here, knowing that all the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom came over here to the Americas, to Azareth, right, which is Hebrew for unknown land. The south is here in the lowest part of South America, right? And the west would be this part. So this here is what is referred to the southwest. Okay? So this is how we know Chile and Argentina, which are the lowest, most west parts of South America, right? Yes, this part over here is, more west, but again, it's in the north. And Moses said southwest. So that's how we know who the tribe of Naphtali is. Next, just speaking about, that the Argentinians and Chileans, that they are of the 12 tribes of Israel. It tells us in the Bible, right, that first, that the Israelites would be brought over into their eventual bondage again, just like they were in Egypt, through the way of ships. Now this happened both to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom, it happened when they came over here, after being freed from the Assyrian captivity. Once the Babylonians went and invaded the Assyrians, the northern kingdom that were stuck here in Assyria, or in that area where the Assyrians had planted them, had decided to make their way over here. Well, let's go and read real quick the curse that befell the 12 tribes because they went away from worshiping our power, Yahweh of the Bible, right? It tells you here, this is Deuteronomy 28:68. And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now, again, the Lord said that this would befall the 12 tribes of Israel if we were to not follow the commandments, right? The contract we made with the Lord, that being that we would obey his laws and worship only him. Well, as reading the Bible, you understand that all Israel, the northern and southern kingdom, we fell off. We started worshiping other gods, and the Lord in kind, made good on his promise, right? He fulfilled his contract and he punished us for going off. Now, the northern kingdom, we got brought over here to the Americas at about 600 BC, and we came to Azareth. Okay. Now, one thing about this, could be found in 2nd Ezra 13 and 40. This is one of the 14 books that was removed from the Bible, which basically covered the middle period during the Greek captivity, right? Because again, remember, the Old Testament leaves off with the Israelites waiting to basically go into captivity. They were still under the Persians' rules. And then in the New Testament, when the Messiah shows up, all of a sudden they're now under captivity, or for the most part occupation, I should say, by the Romans. So what happened in between those 300 to 400 years? Well, the Greek captivity is what happened, right? The Greeks, Alexander the Great, and all the Edomites that had conquered Greece and started calling themselves the New Grecians, they went around the world and they conquered it, and they divided it up amongst themselves after Alexander the Macedonian died, and they went through and they conquered Israel, right? They came in and brought hell upon the southern kingdom. Now, that is recorded in the Apocrypha, right? And also, there's other books that was in the Apocrypha, right? A total of 14 books that the church basically omitted from the Bible, right? This happened around like 1800. So that way they could get rid of things found in the Apocrypha. Things like who are the northern kingdom, where they went, right? Who are the Edomites, right? And all these interesting things that they don't want you to know about. Well, right here, this scripture in 2nd Ezra 13 and 40 tells you where the 10 tribes went. It says, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea, the king, whom Salmanasar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. So, like I said again, that part there is talking about when the northern kingdom was taken from Israel into the land of Assyria and their empire, and they basically were planted around, over the waters, right, the Euphrates water, river and everything, and they basically dwelt in that land. Now we stayed there for about 100 years. Then the Babylonians came and conquered the Assyrians, right? That's where you hear about Nineveh falling and stuff. Well, once Assyrians fell, we decided to move on, right? Let's find out what we did. Verse 41. But they took this counsel amongst themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Azareth, right? And that's basically here in the Americas. Okay, Azareth means another land, and remember the nation of Israel had the understanding of the Americas, because when you read First Kings, King Solomon, he basically had the Hamite navy come here to the Americas. They called it the land of Ophir, to come get gold and animals and take them back to King Solomon, right? And they would come every 3 years, a year and a half here and a year and a half back to Israel, right? Here meaning America. So this is why when it says here that the voyage took a year and a half, we understand that that was a one-way trip to the Americas. Okay, so there you go. So that shows you that when the 10 tribes left, they didn't go up to like Europe, like a lot of these Christians like to say. Okay, because it doesn't take a year and a half to go from the Mesopotamia down here up into Europe. That right there is like a 2-month journey. Okay, 6-month journey if you're going really slow, but basically 2 months to go from here to there. And the reason you know this is because in the time right here in the Bible timeline, the Knights Templars, when you go into the Crusades, right, you had the final battle for Jerusalem between the Arabs, the Ottoman Empire, and the Crusaders, and namely the Knights Templars. When they fell in 1291 AD, it took them 2.5 months to go from Israel to modern day Switzerland and establish Switzerland. Okay, so it basically took them 2.5 months from Israel to get to Switzerland. So that shows you that it didn't take a year and a half to go from down here in this area, Mesopotamia, the Levant, to go up here to Europe. So that whole thing that the 12 tribes or the 10 tribes went up to Europe, that's a bunch of BS, right? They came to the Americas. The 10 tribes, for the most part, are the Latinos and Native Americans. And then later, in the 1600s, the Lord brought the southern kingdom of Israel over to the Americas. And he brought them over through the North Atlantic slave trade. Okay? Because remember, in 70 AD, the southern kingdom, basically they got conquered by the Romans, and the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. And they took a lot of southern kingdom Israelites into the Roman slave markets, where those Israelites that were slaves would eventually rise up and take over Rome, but that would be about 100 to 200 years after they were taken in. Now, the other Israelites that survived from being captured and didn't die off, in the siege, fled down into Africa, just like our forefathers, and they stayed there for about 1,500 years until, like I said, they got taken up and sold into slavery through the North Atlantic slave trade. And that fulfills the prophecy that the Lord will bring us into bondage again through ships, on the other side of the world. And that's why the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, we all share the same history of going into captivity, being destroyed, and ultimately being reconditioned and conquered, and basically losing our last names, losing our identity, and serving our captors in their land. And that's why we are all here in the Americas. So hopefully this video was edifying. Okay, hopefully I was able to break down who is the tribe of Naphtali, that being the Argentinians and the Chileans. So again, with all that, let's go and give all honor and glory and praises to Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Shem Ruach HaKodesh. Shalom.